It's the 15th of November, 2007, only about a week before
Thanksgiving.
Drumstick Day. Turkey and dressing. I must say that as in real time, we had our harvest dinner at the St. Alexander's Church in Morrisonville last Sunday. 300 more dinners than last year, so
Excellent.
there are more turkeys than me out there in the world. Guess where we came to with our little corner today? Not far from Mark Barie, because he lives and works right here at 158 Lake Street, cross-border development, right, Mark?
That's correct.
Great to see you again.
Thank you. Nice to have both
Father
of you.
Boucher, how are you?
Fine.
I haven't seen you in several years.
Glad to see you again, too.
Great to see you. And you know why we're here. Because there's a miracle, not in Vermont, but sitting right here at this table today. What do you think of this guy writing this wonderful book about you?
That's a miracle. That's a miracle that I ever came to Vermont, that I came to St. Anne's Shrine, and that I met Mike Barie. And that's a great miracle because he wrote about my life.
Does this wonderful father look like he's 85 years young? I bet he and I could jog to Champlain this afternoon and he'd win.
I'm afraid not.
He slowed down a little bit, but not so that anyone would notice. And that's one of the things mentioned in the book is that even when Father was in his 70s, he was keeping a pace that most men half his age wouldn't be able to accomplish.
You know, nowadays, my own kids who are now, and many of them in their 50s, early to mid-50s, are planning their retirements.
Mm-hmm.
Here's a guy who's 85 now?
85 years old, and I just retired a few weeks ago. And I hated to leave my work, but the time has come. Old gray mare, she ain't what she was.
I bet when did you join the priesthood?
1948.
Did you know that you'd be working till 2007?
I thought I'd be working till 2000.
You just put another chapter on the end of it to make sure everything was going to be okay.
That's right, but it's been enjoyable. I really enjoyed those 59 years as a priest, especially working at St. Anne's Shrine and at Alberg and Isle La Motte in the parishes.
I have to tell you that I had lived here for many years before Calvin finally took me over there. And, I sense things as we all do. When there are beautiful things, I cry. When there are sad things, I cry. When there are happy things, I cry. I was overwhelmed by the emotion that's in every particle of air in that place. It makes me feel good to drive up there.
It's been my feeling right along. As you come down the hill, you can feel the presence of the Holy Spirit and the love of God and neighbor there. It was just beautiful to work there for almost 40 years. That's almost impossible.
I think that kept you going. I mean, I've watched that place from a distance, but now that I've been there many times with Calvin and without Calvin, I'm enriched every time I go over there.
That's very
Selene
nice.
agrees too.
That's very nice to hear that because that's why I was sent there to rekindle the spirit and make it alive again. So I guess we were successful from that viewpoint.
And I have to tell you that my exposure to the shrine until I met Father was rather limited. I do remember shortly after Christine and I got married, we couldn't wait for our Oliver to be born, and we needed some assistance, so we went over there and lit a candle to St. Anne and asked for her help. When my fourth child came along, I went back and blew out the darn candle.
I love it.
And but I was only there occasionally, and it wasn't until after I was inspired to write the book about Father and then began interviewing his family members and his friends and his many acquaintances that I learned from other people what a very special place St. Anne's Shrine was. There are literally tens of thousands of people who have received healing there, and I'm not talking necessarily physical healing, but hearts that were broken that were mended again because of St. Anne's Shrine, and candidly because of this man.
Well, we never stress the physical healing because when that happens, people sometimes become emotional and they want to come there and be healed. And if they're not healed, then they're disappointed. So we never pushed it, but they did happen, and we were very happy to be part of it. Father Fredette from Canada who was with me for 30 years was a big factor. And he would always used to say, God does the work.
Isn't it true, though? Isn't it true? And if if we acknowledge that when we're young people, then there's a good chance we'll get to grow old.
That's
right. And I've always felt healed, and I never knew I had anything wrong with me when I drove up to that place. But you just feel so enriched and so full of good things when you drive over there. That's a great thing. Why did you? How did? Give us the metamorphosis of writing this book. When did it first dawn on you that you ought to do it? You've never written a book before, Mark.
No, I am a first-time author, and my writing experience was rather limited. I had written an article on a trip to Russia that I had made, which was published in a local weekly newspaper. I wrote another article on my ancestors, my in-laws' ancestors, and then the bug kind of bit me that I really wanted to write a book. The first-time author thing. And I literally toyed with various ideas for a book and then abandoned them over a 2-year period. I just couldn't come up with an idea that I was truly inspired by, that because it's a lot of work to write a book. And I honestly, and this is in the book, I was sitting at St. Mary's Church Sunday morning, 8 o'clock Mass. I should have been listening to Father Jay's sermon. I wasn't. Instead, I was daydreaming, and I was staring right at the statue of St. Anne, which is located in St. Mary's. And it literally happened in a second. I looked at St. Anne and I said, St. Anne's Shrine, Father Boucher. And I turned to my wife and I said, I'm going to write Father Boucher's life story. To which she very compassionately said, pay attention. And because I wasn't paying attention to Father Jay, I came back to the office on Monday. I wrote a letter to Father Boucher. I mentioned 2 names of people, mutual acquaintance, Lucille Chamberlain, Rouse's Point, and my partner in the real estate business, Matt Ware. And I asked Father if he would consider it. I then called Father. We agreed to have lunch at the Anchorage restaurant. God bless the Anchorage restaurant.
Just to let our viewers know, because this program might not be on for a while. We're recording this in November 2007. If you knew how I felt when I heard that fire had broken out again.
Yes, and we're within sight of the ruins here on Lake Street, of course. Very sad.
The beautiful, historic
Very
Anchorage
sad.
burned down before in 1990. And here we are, 17 years later, the same thing happened. Anyway, go ahead.
Well, and one of my best memories would be that lunch with Father. And I remember the day as if it were yesterday, even though it was now almost 4 years ago, because I was waiting for Father. And Father is better than most politicians that I know. He entered the door of the Anchorage, and I think it took him 15 minutes to get to my table, because every single person in the restaurant either was greeted by or wanted to be greeted by the good Father. So finally he came to my table. Finally I told him the story. And he said, well, obviously you have been sent by the Holy Spirit, because it was just a week or 2 earlier that he'd been complaining to his secretary, Helena, that he wanted to write his life story, but how to do it, how would we get the help? And then along comes my letter. So he said, well, you've been sent by the Holy Spirit. And I swear to God, I said to Father, I said, well, that's good, Father, because I have no idea what I'm doing.
You didn't know you were the messenger, huh?
I have no idea what I was doing. I still don't.
That's a miracle, that he would be inspired in church to write my life. My life, which is a miracle, how I came to Vermont with my parents and then went to college, and I was ordained a priest and sent to St. Anne's Shrine. And then he picked that up in the book that he wrote, which he did very, very well, very impartially, and told the facts as they were.
Well, I don't agree, Father. I'm rather partial about you, but hopefully the book doesn't look that way.
How many people do you know who are in their 80s, 90s? We have something like 27,000 Americans who are over 100 years old nowadays, and that number is expected to double in a few years. Those stories have to be told. People who have had good lives and sometimes not so good lives still deserve to have their stories told. And who deserves it more than Father Boucher right here?
It's a miracle that it was written, and I'm very grateful, Mark, for all the effort you put into it with your family and your friends and our own self.
Well, it's been a labor of love for me, and I have to tell you that I had no idea that the story was that interesting, or the book would literally write itself, which it did. It didn't seem to matter where I went. I did more than 65 interviews.
Did you
over a period
really?
of years, yeah, and a lot of them in person. And we tried to double and triple check the facts and the stories. But my most impressive interviews were with Father Boucher. And I will give you an example. During one of our interviews, he was talking about how he was going to go to the juniorate in St. Edmunds, Swanton, excuse me. And he told me that his parents were able to send him to this boarding school because they were paying X amount of dollars for his brother's tuition, but he was going to get it half off. Fast forward a year later, I'm at St. Michael's College. I'm digging through their archives, and what do I find? I find the financial records for this little junior high school in Swanton. I find the Boucher family financial records, and the tuition was exactly what he said it was. And now this is like 50 years later. I mean, so he's a great person to interview. To this day, he's got a mind like a trap. I mean, he remembers everything. He remembers people's names and faces. So of all the subjects for a book that I could have selected, I think this fellow was one of the easiest.
These were all gifts of Almighty God, and the book certainly shows the spirit that Father Fredette and I had at the shrine, loving everyone, the poor, the sick, the ignorant, the wise, the crippled, and the infirm. We loved them all, and they sensed it. They knew that we loved them, and that's what brought them to us.
You know, it's somewhat of a miracle to be able to grow to this age, and I know you're going to live at least 30 more years, so get ready for it, Father. To get to this age and still have that wonderful wit, that wonderful memory, that wonderful curiosity about people and life, to still have that intact. Look at the smile. Isn't it great that the November issue of the National Geographic magazine has a cover story on memory? If everybody should find a way to read a copy of it, because it focuses on how some people remember some things. I'm one of those people who doesn't remember very much.
I can hardly remember yesterday, but one day Father came to visit me unexpectedly, and it was the day that I retrieved some pictures from the archives at St. Michael's, so I thought I would trick him. So I showed him a picture of this lady here. I don't know if Calvin can pick that up.
You can pick it up a little bit.
And the picture was very small at the time. It hadn't been enlarged. It was about an inch high and about an inch wide. And I said to Father, I said, tell me who this woman is. Now I want to explain that the last time he had seen this woman was when he was 14 years old. I asked him this question when he was 84. So 70 years later, he looks at this picture, took only a second or two, and said, she was the cook at St. Edmunds Junior. I used to wash dishes. I used to wash dishes for her, and he was exactly right. That's exactly who it was. So I had so much fun writing this book because every time I could dig something up, he knew all about it.
So when you started writing it, you didn't really have a plan as to how it was going to evolve?
The first thing that I did was I started a timeline. Of course, starting with Father's parents, his mother and father, and I just kept filling in the timeline. I asked Father for names of people that I could talk to, and everyone that I talked to, I asked them for names. Who knows Father Boucher? Who knows him best? You know, and just kept talking to one person after another. And of course, his circle of friends numbers well into the thousands, so it wasn't difficult finding people. The challenge was finding people that knew about his life, his history, people who had special stories, and I was worried that I wouldn't find enough. I was totally wrong. In fact, we are being lobbied heavily now by people who have purchased the book. They all have their favorite Father Boucher story, and so I'm being asked to do a sequel of nothing but Father Boucher stories.
A second miracle comes to Vermont. Oh, I dropped the book.
That's all right.
Oh, let me grab another one. I get so excited.
It's
the first one is called, we didn't even give the title yet, A Miracle Comes to Vermont.
That's right.
So now you're already into...
we're going to wait till after the holidays. I'm confident that Father's going to live to be 100, so that might give me enough time to do it. But everyone that's purchased a book, and what Calvin's looking at here in front of us, these white papers, these are book orders that have been filled. We sold over 1,000 copies of this book within 3 weeks of its release.
You did?
Yeah, we had a little party for Father for his retirement over at Albert, and that was on September 2nd. And before the end of September, our first 1,000 copies were gone. We had to order another 1,000. It took us 5 or 6 weeks to get them. Of that 1,000, and we've only had them for a couple of weeks now, we've already sold about 350. We're not sure that the books are going to last even to the holidays, and everyone wants them. They are now in a half dozen bookstores in Vermont, a couple of bookstores over here. Borders and Barnes & Noble have agreed to consider the book for inclusion in their retail stores. We've not run a single ad yet. Our first ads will
Can you
run
imagine?
just before Thanksgiving Day, our first ad. So
That's a miracle.
I wish I could sell real
I
estate
think
like
somebody
this.
else
It'd
is
be a lot
running.
more-
Somebody else is running the show. I want
I
people
think
to
so.
know also that you didn't write this book, nor do you consider it a great money-making thing for you personally.
Actually, by agreement, I offered Father, and he graciously accepted, that we would take all of the profits from the book and we would donate it to whichever charities Father designated. So it is truly a labor of love for him and for me, because he had to spend hours with me, I'd have to tell you, listening to my silly questions.
Very enjoyable hours. Very enjoyable time.
But the fruits of our labor will be going to people who need the money.
Isn't that wonderful? Now, how did you get it published? The world publishing books has changed exponentially since I first thought about writing a book many years ago. Tell us about how the process worked of actually getting it
It's
published.
a classic example of what Father has preached for all of his years, and whatever you give shall come back to you 10 times, 20 times over. Several years ago, I did what I consider to be a small favor for a family who needed some immigration help, who shall remain nameless because they wanted it that way. This family happens to own a printing company. And so when it came time to publish the book, I wrote a quick letter to the head of the business, and I said, I need a quote for this book, and all profits are going to charity, so I would appreciate whatever discounts you can give. But it was very simple, and I figured it would cost me, like it usually costs for a book like this, about $5 to $6 a book. So they wrote back to me, the owner's wife wrote back, and she said, it's interesting. She said, we did all of our calculations, and she said, the cost of publishing your book is going to be the exact same amount that you charged us for helping our son, which was $0. And
Did you have to hold on to your chair when you heard? Isn't it beautiful?
Another miracle.
Another miracle.
But that's the way it's been all the way. I mean, now we did have to send it to Albany for what's called the perfect binding, and that cost us a nominal amount. So our first 1,000 books came to us for about $1.50 each. We sell them for $14.95. Calvin, we've even got the official barcode on the back. That's for Barnes and Noble and Borders. But it's been like that ever since. Every time we do something. The other day he came in with 6 people, and they wanted more books, and our new batch hadn't arrived. I said, Father, we're out of books. And he looks at me and he said, are you sure? I went into Cindy's office, and there, sitting on Cindy's desk, was a package with 6 books in it.
Miracle.
Don't you love it?
I bought him
Don't you love
in, he
it?
signed him, he gave him to his friends, and he's leaving. I'm still scratching my head. I go back to Cindy. I said, Cindy, where did those books come from? She said, oh, we shipped them out by mistake, and the people just sent them back to us, and they arrived today.
I love it.
So, this happens all the time when you're working with Father Boucher. Strange coincidences, miracles, I don't care what you call them, but it's been a lot of fun.
Well, how long was it from the day you were sitting at St. Mary's Church and were inspired to the time you saw this first book?
Almost 3 years.
Really?
Took me a long time. Well, I do have some other occupations. I have 2 companies,
Yes.
4 children, a wife, and a lot of other interests, including a television show. I teach a course at Plattsburgh State, and a lot of other hobbies and interests.
You know, you've received many accolades for what you've done, but I'm sure, like everybody else, the greatest pleasure is to just do something like this and not receive anything but the praise of your friends and neighbors in return, and knowing that you've enriched a lot of lives because he's enriched so many lives.
Then thank God for the miracle.
It is a miracle. The word miracle showed up many times here, and we believe in miracles.
Father Boucher is going to leave us one day, but what he's taught people, his example has to live on. That's the real purpose of the book, is so that, and if you look at the book in the back, there's an entire section called Father Boucher Speaks, some of the best advice you'll get in the world on how to live your life and why God is important. And it doesn't matter if you're a Catholic or not, and there's something in here for everyone. His words, his stories, his life in the eyes and words of other people who have worked with him. And for me, although it's taken that long, it's been a pleasure, it's been an inspiration, and he's actually changed my life. This book has changed my life.
And I want to thank you, Mark. Thank you for today is a great pleasure, and that's a miracle.
You know, I think for me, every day is a miracle. You know,
right.
if we can wake up in the morning and be happy with the skin we're in, you know, and just pray for the inspiration and and the energy we need to accomplish what we want to, and to be able to help one person. Like Mark helps a family, gets a book finished. You've helped so many thousands of individuals and families, and now the story is being told.
And I thank the Lord for bringing me to this world and making this possible, and meeting good people like Mark and his family and you.
I love it.
Now, we're not done with you yet, Father. You're going to hang around for at least another 20 years.
Or more.
Or more,
I said
okay.
30, so we'll split the
sounds
difference.
But anyway, that's a quick story about how the book came about.
Well, did you start writing immediately, or did you say, okay, I got to get this timeline, then I got to start doing all these interviews, and then I'll write? Did you write a chapter as you went? Or
actually, after my first interview, before the end of that day, I wrote the first chapter.
Did you really?
It was an amazing interview with some great fans of Father, Andre and Pauline Bouchard.
Oh.
And Andre Bouchard told me the story of how he was literally electrocuted on the grounds of St. Anne's Shrine while he was doing some tree surgeon work. Accidentally sent a chain, a piece of chain over a utility wire, appeared by all the witnesses to have died, and was revived by another pilgrim at the shrine. And it was an odd way to introduce Father Boucher, because if you start reading the book, you'll see the story of the electrocution. But the story isn't of this miracle of Andre Bouchard, because at the very end of that chapter, it says that while everyone was absolutely convinced that this was a miracle, there was one person who just kind of poo-pooed the idea. And it was a then 65-year-old priest who went into Andre Bouchard's room, Andre said, it's a miracle, Saint Mother, the Mother of Mary saved me. And Father said, now, Andre, the good Lord was just watching over you. And of course, that's how the story begins, about this man who doesn't like to talk about miracles, but everywhere he goes seems to produce them, or at least be next to them when they happen. So,
I'll watch him when he leaves to see if his feet are really on the floor.
so that chapter was probably the first, and I think one of the easiest to write. The most difficult to write was the chapter that described how Father eventually left the shrine. He's terribly missed at the shrine, but I guess it was time to go. I would love to have seen him stay there for another 39 years, but that wasn't to be. That was a difficult chapter to write. The rest of the chapters were heartwarming stories, fun to read, fun to write. So.
Part of the whole story, very important, but we come and we go. We're here for a time, and we have to do the best we can, as often as we can, as lovingly as we can, for man and for God. The book, incidentally, was the reason why I was at the shrine was to bring people to God and God to people. And it was a miracle that we were able to do that.
You know, I said this morning to my wife over our first cup of coffee, you turn the television on and you hear, it attacks you with claws. And there are too many people hating too many people.
Yeah.
Too many countries hating too many countries.
So much bad news.
And we need more good news, like a miracle comes to Vermont. I didn't invent the phrase good news, but we need more. Don't we need more good news?
We do.
We need more love for each other, for our fellow man. It sounds trite and mundane, but in today's world, we need a lot more miracles like you, Father Boucher. We really do.
Thank you very much.
It seems to have been Father's entire life story that in the midst of bad news, he could inspire people to find the good news. I mean, Father has literally spent his life dealing with people who were dying, dealing with people who themselves were dealing with death, perhaps the imminent loss of a loved one. And by spending a little bit of time with them, by praying with them, by talking to them, was able to get them to understand that this life is simply an introduction to the next life. And literally, there are stories in the book where literally a mother and a daughter, for example, the daughter terminally ill, and Father would pray with them and talk with them for 15 or 20 minutes, and the mother and the daughter would leave the shrine with smiles on their face and be happy again, even though death was literally around the corner. That takes inspiration. In my opinion, that takes a holy man to do that. And so you're looking at a man that in the midst of bad news is still able to find and impart good news.
How early, when you were a little boy, you grew up in Quebec?
No, I grew up in Vermont. I came to this country in 1922. I was 3 months old. But I was brought up in Vermont among farming people who worked hard during the Depression. So we knew what poverty was, we knew what suffering was, and we knew what self-denial was.
How soon did you feel, how young were you when you felt this calling to the priesthood?
Probably in the 8th grade of my grammar school.
No kidding.
Yeah, the pastor put his hand on my head and he said, "You'll be a priest someday." And he was right.
You know, we all, it's our desire as we grow older and get into the last quadrant of our lives to leave some kind of a legacy. And you know, whether we have that ego you mentioned before or not, and you know the people in this room have at least small egos, we work very hard to leave some legacy, either with our children or with the world in general.
Father mentioned that when he first started feeling the calling, he was young, but Father, I believe, for the first time ever, shared with me the exact moment when he knew that he was going to take his vows. And if Calvin will allow me, I'm going to read just one paragraph.
Yeah,
out
we
of
sure
the book.
would.
It was Good Friday, a day of fasting, abstinence, and prayer. Maurice Boucher climbed the hill which lay behind the seminary. His view included the school's sugar bush, where he'd worked to collect sap and make the syrup. It would be one of many conversations between the man and his creator, but on this particular day, the seminarian made a simple request. He asked God to let him know if a life in his service was what he wanted, was what was his plan for Maurice Boucher. The silent beauty of that moment on the hill was not interrupted by voices, signs, or supernatural special effects. Instead, the young man, who had already learned that God could speak without speaking, rose to leave and found himself awash in relief and joy. He told no one, but it was on that day and at that moment that Maurice Boucher said yes to God.
That was a miracle too. On the top of the hill on Good Friday.
Isn't it amazing and wonderful?
Yeah.
And how many times have you said yes since then?
No, every day.
And we better.
Well, one thing I would like to do before we forget Father is to thank all of Father's supporters and friends. You know, when I was beginning the marketing for the book, I was very naive. I asked Father for his mailing list, and I thought he was going to send me a couple hundred names. It was more than 2,000. And although we can't tell exactly, we believe that probably when we sent that one mailing out, more than half of the people responded. And now what's happening,
Oh boy.
people who have purchased one book have called us back, because you can call our toll-free number or go online at crossborderpublishing.com, and they said, you know, I've gotten the first book, I love the book, now I want to order 3 more for Christmas gifts. And so we are literally doing repeat sales over and over again. People are buying 3, 4, 5, 6 at a time. The bookstores are now calling. The other day we had a bookstore call us from Burlington, Vermont. They wanted us to send 6 books, and I said, how did you find out about the book? And they said, people keep coming in and asking for it. So it's been quite a thrill to watch this thing literally launch itself.
And that's got to make you feel good after all this
Well, but I have to
labor
confess,
of
Father
love.
doesn't agree with me, but I think a monkey could have written the book and it would have been a bestseller.
No.
It was a great subject.
You know what? There was a plan long before any of us were born to have this book written. His life was already written down before that day when he said yes on a Good Friday. And you didn't even know this was going to sneak up on you until that given day.
I had no idea.
But here we are, and it's all part of that miraculous plan.
A miracle has come to Vermont.
Now, why? How long did you struggle with the title?
You know, that was difficult because what I wanted to call it originally was Miracles of the Heart, because that's what Father has done for his 60 some odd years, 59 years as a priest, I believe. He mends broken hearts. However, Miracles of the Heart is the name of an organization. And so I didn't want to step on someone else's name. And of course, I wanted to avoid a book about miracles because Father and I agreed that we don't want to give people false expectations. But I was going back reading the 2nd chapter in the book, and where it describes how young Maurice Boucher was brought into the United States in a clothes basket in the back seat of the family Buick, I believe.
Is this a Moses story?
And,
a Moses story?
And it dawned on me that was the day the real miracle happened. That was the day that a miracle came to Vermont, a little tiny miracle, just a couple months old. And that's how the title came along, A Miracle Comes to Vermont. Our book was just reviewed in the Plattsburgh Press Republican just a few days ago.
Yes,
It
it
received
was,
a
over
very
the past
favorable
weekend.
review. And I was interested that the book critic, who doesn't know Father Boucher, doesn't know me, but instantly recognized that the book the miracle that comes to Vermont was Father Boucher. It was not about any other miracle. So I think the name has worked, and it certainly sold well.
And you enjoyed the process,
Oh, I
even though
loved it.
I'm sure there were a few days when you pulled your hair out saying, where's the next chapter coming from?
You know what the toughest part of writing a book is getting rid of the spelling errors.
Oh boy, I'm so thrilled that you
Oh.
told me that.
I have
Thank goodness for spell check.
Everybody-
And my wife edits everything I write, saying, no, Gordy, come on. Where
I
did
need
you
more
get-"
editors. The ones I had were good, but I need more. And on our second edition, we cleaned up a lot of the mistakes. But now when I look, I hate to look at it anymore because I find one more mistake and I want to pull my hair out. That's the toughest part of writing a book. But I guess as long as I spelled Father Boucher correctly, it didn't matter, right?
That's right.
That's important to me. It is tough to get the phrasing right. Even English majors and people who've been teachers for years have trouble getting phrasing right so it reads easily. Everybody's got a style.
Yes.
I write the way I talk, so what you sees is what you get. You've never written a book before, so you didn't really know whether you should have long paragraphs or short paragraphs.
I ended up with very short paragraphs. I like to pack a lot into a sentence. I love drama. I like to keep the reader waiting until the very end of the chapter to figure out what happened or what the true meaning was or how it all ended. And we have been told repeatedly that it's a quick read. People will generally sit down with the book and they will not put it down until they're finished. Others prefer to take
Perfect
their
length.
time.
177?
135 pages.
I'm
I
sorry.
believe. 135.
135.
A
Perfect
lot of
length.
photos in the back, and most people around here read it, love it because there are literally hundreds of references to local people and local places.
Exactly. There you go. The secret.
Yeah.
How many times did you rewrite?
Oh my! I would say I was rewriting right up until I sent it to the printer. Every time I read a chapter, there was a phrase, there was a sentence, there was a word. I couldn't leave it alone. I think that's the curse and perhaps also the blessing of a writer. You never get to finish it until you've surrendered it to the printer. And the minute you leave it there, you have a regret.
When you said that, I was just thinking of being on the radio all those years where you can't take it back. Yeah, whatever you say is gone, and there were a few things I'd love to take
Writers
back.
have that luxury right up until they leave it at the printer. Then you can't take it back. You have to leave it alone. But if you're lucky and you sell your first 1,000 copies, you get to print another. And when you print the second 1,000, you can make all the changes you wanted to make on the first 1,000.
How many photographs?
I'd say there's about 12.5 photographs in here. Some with Father and his parents. Mrs. DePreto, the famous cook. One of my favorites is Father Boucher. I don't think he knew this picture existed. It's very hard to see. It's a very old photograph.
Top one or bottom
The
one?
top one.
Top one.
And it's a very young seminarian collecting sap in the woods. You know, when Father went to the seminary, he just didn't pray and learn. He had to work.
Wow.
And they did everything. It was a totally self-sufficient seminary where they had to make syrup and they had cows and farm equipment. And so he never left the farm, I guess.
I built the cows there many weeks. When the farmer was sick, they would ask me to go milk the cows, and I would. There were 6 cows, so we had a little task there in the morning for a good many weeks.
Where did you find that picture?
Well, I went to St. Michael's because St. Michael's College is run by the Edmondites. Father, of course, is an Edmondite, and they maintain a very nice archive of Edmondite history. And it took me the better part of a day before I discovered the cache of photos of the St. Edmund's Seminary, or the juniorate, and then the seminary we went to. And it was just one of those miracles. I opened up this envelope and out spilled these pictures, and I started looking at them, and I said, that's him. And I wasn't sure. And I verified, I bought the pictures, and Father said, yes, that's me. And we found a whole bunch of pictures there and used just the ones that we thought were perfect.
You know, of course, that this interview today and all the others you've done are going to open up this whole, I won't call it Pandora's box, but a whole new dimension that will force you to do at least 2 or 3 more.
Well, in fact, my wife, Christine Racine, and I are collaborating right now on a book. This is her inspiration. And the title of it right now is the History of the Border at Champlain. My wife, of course, works for Customs and Border Protection, longtime immigration official, and she's the historian in the family. And so that may be the second book. But with apologies to my wife, if the calls continue and the pressure keeps up, we may have to insert in there really quickly a sequel to this one because Think about it, 1,300 people have bought the book. Probably by the end of the year 2000, every single one of them have a story. If I did like you and just took the best ones, I would have a second book. And if it meant spreading the word of Christ and telling everyone the story of Father Boucher, it would be well worth the effort.
And you will receive more stories. You will receive more photographs. And you will enrich more lives because people love to tell the story.
Oh my God, and there's so many.
There's an old song, I love to tell the story. Absolutely true. People love to tell their stories. They like to see something in print that relates to their own lives, like these photographs, like mention of local names. Mark, you have no idea.
Well, it's been fun.
But the publicity's going to go on. What's the toll-free number?
The toll-free number to order the book is 1-800-545-8125. You can also go to the publishing company, which I set up simply to promote the book. It's called, the website's called crossborder-publishing.com. Or just pick up the phone and call Mark Barie. My number's in the book. But the toll-free number is the easiest way to do it.
You can't get on Amazon? Have you tried?
Amazon.com does not have it yet, nor does, but Barnes & Noble and Borders, we're working on that. We expect an answer from them in the next couple of weeks.
I don't know how the Amazon things work. It's just that I
It's
see a lot of
tough.
books on there.
Amazon.com, you have to have the SKU
You got
sticker.
it. You got
And
it.
we just got those a couple of weeks ago. And they have a very formal regimen. But I'm fairly certain that the Burlington stores and the Plattsburgh stores will view this as what they call a book of local interest, and they'll carry it in their local book section. But in the meantime, the corner bookstore in Plattsburgh is carrying it. There's a Christian bookstore in Burlington that's carrying it. Virtually every bookstore and general store in northern Vermont will have it by the end of this week. We're just making the deliveries this weekend. So if someone wants the book, they won't have to try too hard. But the easiest way is 1-800-545-8125.
I think you're just opening the book, this miracle, opening the front page. This is just the beginning. Did you read the book
Twice.
twice already?
And I enjoyed it more the second time.
Isn't that? Did you recognize yourself in there?
Hardly.
I love it.
Well, we do have what's called a caveat in the back of the book with respect to the Mother Church, of course, that says that it must be noted that the words saint, miracle, miraculous are all descriptors based solely on either the author's opinion or others' opinions, and they're not meant to represent or anticipate decisions of the Catholic Church. And of course, we put that in there with great respect for Mother Church. We let people draw their own conclusions. But the real story here, the real miracle, is all of the people with whom Father has come into contact who came to him with broken hearts and broken souls and left whole again because he was able to inspire them, he was able to convince them of the faith that he has, and that in time God will take care of everyone.
When any one of us has an opportunity to help somebody else and accepts that opportunity as a responsibility, we're blessed. Who could be more blessed than you, Father?
And I've been blessed from the time that I was born until the day I go back to the Lord. And I thank him every day for every hour I've had.
What? Are there any regrets in your life?
Not really, no. Not really. The only regret is that I could have done more, could have lived longer.
Oh,
And
you're not giving up. Don't kid me. Retirement is just a word in quotes for you. I think I know better.
well, we'll try as best we can, as long as we can, and as hard as we can.
Do you pay attention to world events? Do you watch news or read newspapers?
Oh, yes, I do, yeah, every day.
Do you read newspapers every day?
I read the newspapers and I watch the news every night.
And sometimes it's hard to digest. We mentioned that earlier in our show today. You know, you almost feel guilty when you say the world needs more love. But remember that song, What the World Needs More? But it's true, isn't it?
And of course it's true. And that's the only way we're going to... I think that our country has been blessed with the tremendous Christian faith and other faiths that have made them good people, honest people, hardworking people, and that's what made our country so great, based on good, honest people.
At times we stray.
Well, this is
It takes people like you to bring us back into the fold, if you will.
If we have time, I want to squeeze one more
We
story
got
in here.
time.
Father, by all appearance, is a very gentle man. I mean, pure love, great big heart. But he can be tough when he has to be. And there's a story in the book that I wanted to mention because I think Calvin in particular, as a sports fan, might enjoy this. It turns out that one of Father's students, when he was teaching at St. Michael's, was a member of the Brown clan, whose patriarch, it was said, actually owned the Boston Celtics. And I just want to tell you, I want to read you a one-paragraph story. It says, "And yet, when the occasion called for it, the young priest could more than hold his own with errant students. James Brown, it was said, was one of the same clan whose patriarch owned the Boston Celtics basketball team. The well-to-do student objected strenuously to his instructor's seating arrangement, alphabetical so as to make less difficult the memorization of students' names. And when young Brown loudly growled, 'We're being treated like kids,' the now white-collared farm boy turned priest left no doubt as to who was in charge. 'Mr. Brown, there is not enough room in this class for both of us. One of us is going to leave, and you can be assured that it will not be me.' Mr. Brown was silenced and eventually went on to become a model student."
Thank you.
Don't forget there was corporal punishment back in those days in schools.
It's amazing, some of the stories in the book. They're fascinating to me. For example, one of Father's most trusted helpers and aides, Deacon Vincelette, who happened to be the Marine corporal on duty at the embassy in Hungary when Cardinal Minzenzi was sent into exile and forced to seek asylum. And as you go through the book, you'll see, of course, a lot of local names and faces, but a few famous names and places too, including in the back, you'll see a picture of the Good Father with a fellow who I first knew of as Karol Wojtyła, but most of the world knows him as Pope John Paul II. So, and on that particular day, there were the only two in the Vatican wearing brown shoes. Father didn't have the right part of his wardrobe.
We didn't tell the story except off camera. Go ahead.
Well, Father was invited to go to the Vatican, and the Pope came over to greet him, but it was noted that only he and the Pope were wearing brown shoes that day. But Father was greeted by the Pope personally, which I'm sure was quite an honor. But that picture is in the book, and along with you golf fans, there's a picture of Father in the middle of his golf swing. Quite the golfer in his time. And although when he first started out, he wasn't a great golfer, he bet with one of his, I think it was the superior general, the president of the college, Father Moriarty, it was said had a very strong pitching arm. And so after some discussion, it was decided that a bet would be placed. I think it was candy bars was the coin of the realm, as to who had the longest swing, either Father Moriarty with his hard ball or Father Boucher with his golf club.
The 3-iron.
With a 3-iron. But he didn't swing very well, so Father Moriarty won the bet. But Father Boucher went on to be a pretty good golfer before he finished. Also plays bridge, a very well-respected bridge player. Doesn't play much lately, though, right?
Not so much.
Yeah, not so much.
As often as I can.
So.
Now let me ask you something. Besides going to visit the Pope, have you traveled a lot?
Well, I went through Europe. My brother, who was a doctor, when I was ordained 25 years, paid me a trip through Europe. But that's about as far as I've traveled. I haven't traveled. I went to South America once, and so I haven't traveled that much.
There was a trip to Florida, I think.
Oh yeah, I used to go to Florida every winter.
That's not a bad idea.
Yeah.
And when he came back, about a week later, the checks would start coming from Florida too. Wherever he went, people would give him money for the shrine. It was quite an operation. Father was very adept at raising funds, and still is today, as a matter of fact.
With this great vision you had to write this book in the very beginning, did you picture it being about this long, or did you have no clue until you finished it?
Honestly, Gordy, I had no clue. I thought it would end when it ended. And when we got to pretty much the end of Father's active years, then we went to talk to other people, and it was simply time to end it. It just kind of ended naturally. I know it sounds trite, but in my opinion, the book wrote itself. I was just holding the pencil at the time.
You know, anybody who is worth their salt as a writer has to acknowledge that some of the sentences don't come from their fingers are being used by somebody to write with. Mm-hmm. You can call them literary muses, you can call it divine intervention, but anybody who writes anything, sometimes it's like great painters. I've talked to so many great painters. They finish a work of art and say, "Whoa,
Well,
where did that come from?"
it's interesting. I would write literally a sentence or eventually a paragraph and finally a chapter. And when it was done, I knew it was done. It was finished. And I wouldn't show it to anyone until I felt good about it. And then I would bring it to my first and best critic. I would bring it to my wife, Christine. And
Kay would love to hear this.
the
'Cause she
general
knows
and the general rule of thumb was if Christine cried, that meant it was a good chapter.
Stephen King
And I think
does
she
it too.
cried
you
at
know.
every chapter. Then I would clean it up a little bit more,
Yeah.
and then I would show it to Father. And I was giving Father 5 or 6 chapters at a time.
What do you mean clean it up?
They're grammatical errors. They're grammatical. Although there is a racy story in here. I won't read it because it's a bit long, but I think I can tell the story rather quickly. And it's a story about Sister Mary Ann Gower, which I'm sure many of your viewers know. Sister Mary Ann Gower used to ride her bicycle to the rectory, to the shrine, and she'd help out Father. And one day she left her convent in it was Champlain very early in the morning, and it decided to rain that day. And so by the time she got to beautiful downtown Alberg, it was literally pouring, and she was soaking wet. And so she decided that she would go to the rectory where the good Father had just taken over as the pastor, and hopefully be able to get her clothes dried off, and also to get ready for that morning's masses at the shrine, because she would always help Father out. And when she got to the shrine, to the rectory, of course, it was very early in the morning. She woke Father up. Father came to the door, looked like he just rolled out of bed. He was all disheveled. Very gracious. He let her in. She got rid of one layer of clothes. He got her a blanket and towels. He started cooking her breakfast. He left the oven door open so as to warm her a little bit more. With the blanket, another layer of clothes went off. And it was about the time when the clothes had been strewn all over Father's rectory. She wrapped in a blanket, Father sitting at the breakfast table, obviously just rolling out of bed, when the housekeeper showed up. And Father turned to the housekeeper and said, "I'd like you to meet my friend, Sister Mary Ann." And the housekeeper, I'm told by several people, was unable to speak for several minutes, and then managed to greet Sister Mary Ann Gore. And of course, Father Boucher, blissfully ignorant of the scandalous circumstances, simply ate his breakfast.
Isn't that what a great story?
It's in the book.
Did you just take notes as a newspaper person might when you did the interview, or did you record the interviews? How did you do?
My feeling about tape recording was that it was too inhibiting. I felt that people would be bothered by the tape recorder. Fortunately for me, when I was in Plattsburgh State, I was on the debate team, and I was literally trained how to take notes, literally of a conversation, and miss very little of it. I have my own little shorthand. So I took copious notes during my interviews. The trick with taking notes, however, is you must transcribe them immediately. So I would literally, I would race.
Especially with my kind of shorthand.
Oh yeah, I would race back to the office or to my house. Sometimes I would stop on the road, and I would literally write out my notes in longhand. It would be pages and pages. And then it didn't matter when I decided to write the chapter on that interview. I could go back over and over again. And then I indexed each of those interviews by subject matter, and I just kept filling in the index. So if I wanted, for example, to write something about Tosca, Father's famous dog, my index would tell me that there were references to Toxas in interviews numbers 6, 7, 14, 28, and 37. So I could pull those out, read about Tosca, and then I could write my chapter about Tosca.
The reason
the
I
dog.
asked, it sounds like a very technical thing, but everybody does it differently.
Mm-hmm.
It was many years before anybody in the newspaper business that I do ever bought a tape recorder. They all studied shorthand or had their own shorthand.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I did in the radio business. You would tell me a news story, and you didn't have time to start tape recorders or anything else. You just took your little shorthand, and then you wrote the story, and then you spoke it.
Oh, and I would also try to, with respect to Father. Father, I can't recall a single mistake that he made. I think there was one minor one about the number of you. I never told you this. About the number of students that died in World War II at St. Michael's when you were in school. But I think you were referring to the number in your class. I was referring to the number campus-wide. But other than that, what I would do is I would try to get at least two other people, a total of 3, to tell me about a particular event. So for example, there's a story in the book about how Tosca, the dog, showed up at the shrine the same day that the bishop did. And while the bishop was saying Mass, Tosca decided to ingest his holy water rather than be sprinkled by it. He went to the ceremonial bucket and drank out of it. There's a great story in there about that. Anyway, but I got like 5 or 6 people to tell me about that day. So at the end of the process, I knew exactly what the dog did, what the bishop did, what Father did. So I'm confident that the chapter is accurate. There's no exaggerations. There are no material mistakes or anything like that. That takes time, though. That's one of the tough parts of writing a book.
What was it important for you to get that humor in there?
Oh, I'm not a very funny guy, but I enjoy humor.
Yeah.
And I looked for those kinds of stories. And Father has led such a rich life. And there was humor when he was a child. There was humor when he was at the seminary and when he was teaching at the college. Plenty of humor, and I think you'll smile through much of the book.
Don't you feel as though we have to laugh every day?
We must laugh because laughter is like singing. It brings joy to the people, and we've got to spread that to the people. Spread the good news of God to the people.
You've always felt that way. I've always felt that way.
Yeah.
Most of my friends feel that way, and you have to know how to laugh at yourself,
That's
too.
right, that's right. Don't take yourself too seriously. Let the world do that.
What would your life have been, Father, if you had been a priest somewhere else besides in this neck of the woods?
God, that's why I say it's a miracle that it happened this way. Because I never dreamed that I would be at St. Anne's Shrine or in Alberg and Alama as a pastor. So I thank God for this wonderful, wonderful opportunity to share the good news of the Lord and to share His love.
I don't think Calvin and I have ever done a show, or not very many shows, where we didn't take a moment to tout the area we live in and the people who live in this area. I mean, I've lived in many places, and I've traveled a little bit in my lifetime, and it's always so great to come back home.
That's right.
We have very special people here in Vermont and northern New York. Don't you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. And there are a number of references in the book to people's literally unbelievable generosity, even when faced with difficult circumstances of their own, coming to the aid of a family who'd lost a loved one, coming to the aid of the shrine, coming to Father's aid. I mean, one story after another of people who gave of their time, of their money, to do the right thing and to be charitable. And I don't know that you find that in other parts of the country. I like to think that you do, but there's no doubt in my mind, even in my biased mind, that here in the North Country, we are blessed with some of the nicest people in the world, and I would never leave for that reason alone.
Well, this guy's at least in the top 2 as far as I'm concerned, but isn't it true?
Well, absolutely.
And you both said before, you get back what you give tenfold, 20-fold. And as long as you recognize that, and you're grateful for it.
I think the people who lose sight of it are those who get concerned about the material things, what they own. And they think they're going to get joy out of a new car or a new TV or a bigger house. And the real joy, I find, comes from giving. And the rest takes care of itself. In the back of the book, called Father Boucher Speaks, one of my favorite sayings from Father Boucher is about dying. He says, "I recently took part in a funeral. As we arrived at the cemetery, I looked down in the grave. I did not see any television, VCR, summer camp, a boat, or a car." What a simple way of reminding us that those aren't the things that count. Isn't that great?
No bag
I didn't
of money.
write that, he did.
No,
I got that from his sermon.
That's beautiful.
So,
That's been my view in life, and it has brought me nothing but joy. Even though you have nothing, if you give, you will receive. And that I find that we Americans sometimes are not really generous enough, with all that we have. But we are generous, but perhaps we could do a little more.
I think that's a great lesson, and one that I learned very early when I came here in the North Country, being in the media all these years. All you have to do is explain the need, one way or the other, and all of a sudden that void is filled.
and Gordy, sometimes you don't even have to do that. There's another story in the book. They don't teach business at the seminary, but Father, in my opinion, his makeover of the shrine, redeveloping and rejuvenating the shrine, it's a classic business success story. And his marketing was so subtle, but I think he combined it with what he knows about charity. There's a great story in the book how an Irish couple had come to the shrine. They're actually from Ireland. They were visiting the shrine. Father took the time to give this couple a tour of the shrine, bringing them all over. Eventually, of course, he had to go on to his duty, so he instructed one of his helpers to bring the couple to the shrine's souvenir shop and let them pick out whatever they wanted, and Father would pay for it. So they picked out a crucifix, a $10 item. And of course, Father blessed it for them, and then they left for Ireland. They also left a check for $600. So is that a miracle or is that good marketing? I don't know. That's either marketing or a miracle or perhaps a little bit of both. But the point is, that's how Father took the shrine when he was first assigned from really a series of dilapidated buildings, little known, very rarely visited, to where it was when he left, where he literally raised $1 million a year for the last 3 years of his tenure, turned it into a tourist attraction known throughout Canada and the Northeast that drew 50 to 60 to 70,000 pilgrims a year. Is that business acumen, or is that a miracle, or is it a little bit of both? I'll let the readers decide, but the success is clear.
A miracle comes to Vermont.
I think it might be appropriate, in case we get really lucky in this program of seeing even outside this region, which we would like to dream about, because I think these interviews are so important. Explain a little bit of the history of St. Anne's Shrine for our viewers.
In 1892, Father, the founder of the shrine was a French priest, a French father, and the Edmondites took over in 1904, and they've been there ever since. And it was very popular during the First World War, but then boats stopped coming, and so it wasn't until I was assigned to it in 1956 that we started again reviving it and promoting it, and so the people love St. Anne, love the Blessed Mother, and love Jesus, the son and grandson, and that's how the shrine really relives and continues to exist as a very active instrument in the hands of God to bring people to Him.
You're so eloquent. I love it. And further, that's been sacred ground before Samuel de Champlain ever came down through there in 1609.
Absolutely. In fact, the first bishop of Canada, Bishop de Montmorency Laval, was said to have visited there, and he was the one that requested that it be dedicated to St. Anne. And it was active for, it was garrisoned at one point by about 600 troops. They had to fend off, back then they called them savages, the natives. But eventually peace came to there. But eventually it was all but abandoned. It was a way station for troops, for hunters and trappers and travelers and so on and so forth. And then it kind of came back to life when the Edmondites took over. But it didn't see its best days nor garner its highest recognition until this fellow took over. But I have to tell you, I'm going to pick on Father a little bit. It wasn't an assignment that he expected very quickly. And then a startling decision. In 1956, Father Pirtle summoned the 34-year-old priest and announced that Bishop Ryan wanted the Edmondites to reinvigorate St. Anne's Shrine, as it had languished for a number of years and was in dire need of attention. "Here are the keys," said Pirtle. "But I don't know anything about running a shrine," responded Boucher. "You will learn," said Pirtle. "You will learn." And learn he did.
Learn he did, kiddies. Long before I ever visited the shrine, I talked about it on the radio because there was pilgrimage after pilgrimage after pilgrimage.
Busloads and
the
boatloads.
busload leaves from the parking lot and the boat leaves from, and so many people got there before I did.
Yeah. Earl Carter was the founder of the Northern New York Knights of Columbus every year, which is still very popular.
And I know that a lot of, there have been movie stars, there have been writers and painters and sculptors and people from many, many countries and provinces who have visited St. Anne's Shrine either on purpose or inadvertently because they were in the area and heard about it.
That's right.
But you know, the most dramatic stories, the most moving stories are stories of just plain people like you and I, maybe even plainer than you and I. They're just struggling to make a living in the North Country, but dealing with the loss of a husband or a father or even a child, and somehow managed to find solace and comfort at the shrine and in the words and the company of Father. For that reason, we chose as a picture for the cover of the book, Father. You can barely see them there, sitting on a rather large rock, looking at the main chapel. And this is interesting because we were looking all over for good pictures, and there again, we didn't find any right away. And I said, Father, would you let me take a few pictures? Now, I am not a photographer, believe me. And I must have snapped 25 pictures. And Father was getting rather tired of it, but I talked him out of the car one more time, and I said, why don't you just rest over there? And while he was sitting there, that's what I saw, and that's what I shot. And it turned out to be what we think is a pretty good cover for
Another
the book.
miracle. Another miracle comes to Vermont.
On the back, a smaller photo of Father headed to what's called the Stations of the Cross out at the shrine. A very dramatic picture of Father on his way to Calvary. We hope that's not coming too soon.
Whatever the Lord wants, we'll take.
There you go. That
Well,
sounds
you
good.
know, we've literally written another chapter of your life. But what do you foresee in the future for you? What's the next chapter for you?
Well, I have a little home in my father and mother's house. I retired there, and I'm going to do reading and visiting. My father and mother were very hospitable people, and anybody who wants to come and visit me, I'll be very happy to visit them. But I've slowed down on my day's activities. I don't see so many people or try to preserve my strength. And the miracle to come nearer to Almighty God, who is going to call me someday, that I'll be better prepared.
And that makes you smile all by itself.
That's right, that's right.
How many masses have you done in your lifetime?
365 days a year for 60 years.
Think about that.
That's a lot of masses.
It's a lot
We,
of homilies.
We actually tried to do a count, and we estimated that in the course of I'll read away from the book. In the course of his lifetime, the beloved country priest had celebrated at least 24,000 masses, more than 600 funerals, and as many as 500 weddings. He's also baptized at least 1,000 men, women, and children, and continues to this day. He was busy, very busy, as a matter of fact.
It was a pleasure.
You sit down to write that homily and you say, I need some inspiration right now. Give me the first sentence.
Every week I got 2 stacks of homilies this big that I've kept
Have you?
just for memory's sake, you know.
Isn't that?
I went through about 4 of those stacks. In fact, the portion of the book which says Father Boucher speaks, that came right from his sermons. I probably looked at, I would estimate conservatively, 300 or 400 sermons and picked out those little jewels that I found. And I still have copies of those sermons, not just for backup, because I consider them collector's items, if you will. But those people who missed some of Father's sermons can read pieces of them right in this book.
This thing is picking up momentum, and it was even before Calvin brought his famous Calvin Vision camera in here from Hometown Cable. You've had a number of articles in local
Yeah, these are all the press clippings
publications
so far, and all of them generated by a very, very modest press release. And you know, I wasn't sure how significant the sales were, but I was attending a conference, the Adirondack Conference of Writers, or maybe that's not what the name, but I was told there, and I read later on, that the average book never sells more than 1,000 copies. And only a handful of books sell more than 5,000 copies. So here we are from September 2nd to November 15th, and 1,300 or 1,400 out the door, and we haven't done an advertisement yet. So I have hopes that it's going to continue.
You have a marketing expert on the job.
Another miracle.
Another miracle.
Well, if it keeps going, we're gonna put Father on what we call a book tour, and we'll make him stop at all the bookstores and sign copies. Go ahead and tell them, because you have a better. The day of the retirement brunch, if you will, hundreds of people showed up, and this thing started right after 10:30 Mass. And I don't mind telling you, by the time 2:30 rolled around, I mean, we were just swamped with people that wanted the book, and I was very humiliated, I would say humbled, humbled. People actually wanted me to sign the book. And I look over in the corner, and they had set this fellow up on a table, and he just signed book after book after book. At 2:30, I'm dead on my feet. He's still signing books, greeting people. I mean, I felt like the old man here. And so far, how many books have you signed, Father? You have any estimate?
About 500-600.
At least. And of course, those are the prize books. People continue to call, is it possible to have our books signed by Father? And if I have them, I give them to them. It's no extra charge. And there is at least one bookstore that has autographed copies of the book in their store. But I'm sure that if people want to take the time, either bring the book here or we'll find Father and we'll try to get it signed.
There's a couple of things I want to go over before we wrap this up, and we could kibitz back and forth for a day and a half. First thing, I want to have you give specific directions on how to get to St. Anne's Shrine. We've talked a lot about it. I know there are people watching this program who haven't been there. We want to get them going in the right direction. It's easy to find.
The shrine is quite easy. If you're coming from New York, what you'd want to do is to go through Rouse's Point on Route 11 and then take the bridge to Alberg, Vermont. And when you cross the bridge, you just stay on the main road, which is Route 2, and you go through the village of Alberg. And shortly after you get out of the village, you'll see a sign that says St. Anne's Shrine, and you're there. So from Rouse's Point, a 10-minute drive from Plattsburgh, maybe about 40 minutes. And of course, if you're from the New England area, from the Burlington area, you would take Interstate 89 and get off at the Swanton exit. And I believe it's Route 78 to Route 2. And there again, plenty of signage. One of the first things that our not formally trained in business priest did when he took over the shrine was to make sure that he had signage all up and down Vermont.
Yeah.
And so it was shortly after that people began to find the place, and to this day continue to find it. They won't find Father there very often, but these days. But he is still taking some visitors at the homestead in East Highgate, by appointment.
Well, it's nice to know that you've had your hands on so many things over there. And you have to feel so enriched at this stage in your life, so grateful.
Grateful to the Lord, to my family, to my friends, to my order, to our Diocese of Burlington and the Diocese of New York. I hear this, the Diocese has been very, very cooperative. The priest has been very, very cooperative, very helpful. So I'm thankful to everybody who helped.
Is it my imagination, or is there a little glow around just a little
Well, no offense, gentlemen, but nobody's probably going to ever write a book about you, me, or Calvin. There's been a book written about him.
Not Gordy Little and the Miracle in the same sentence.
Listen, I want to thank you for allowing this interview, both of you, Calvin. You folks do such a great service, everybody, with Hometown Cable. Get messages like this out, but also covering all the sports. Father instantly knew who Calvin was when I dropped the name, and we appreciate this. And as I said, this is for a good cause. All the profits go to charitable causes, and we think it's for a good man. So thank you very much.
And there is more that people want to know. They want to know more about the author. And believe it or not, there might be some little person in Cherubusco who's never heard of Mark Barie. You're a North Country native, boy.
Yeah, I was born in Plattsburgh, long enough to get back to Champlain. I grew up in Champlain. I've lived in Rouse's Point since '76. I crossed paths with the Edmondites after taking my undergraduate degree at Plattsburgh. I went to St. Michael's and took my master's degree over there. I wasn't taught by any Edmondites, though. It was all lay teachers. And started my own company back in 1981. And now I have two companies, a real estate company and an international consulting firm. And in my spare time, I teach at the School of Business at Plattsburgh. Once in a while, I get behind the microphone and host the Reporter Roundtable at Mountain Lake Journal. I have a good time hosting a television show.
I think it's an important program, and I think it ought to be on at least every week.
Well, I'm going to try to talk to my producer to get a more regular appearance there. And this has, of course, been more than a hobby, a labor of love. And somewhere in there's a wife and 4 kids and a daughter-in-law. So I haven't been suffering for a lack of things to do.
You've done a lot of things in your lifetime. You've been connected with the actual history of this North Country since I've known you from the very beginning.
Well, that's because I have a big mouth.
You know, I look at it this way. The North Country's given you something. And you're spending every day giving something back.
Well, that's the best
and that's
part.
Something we mentioned in the very beginning. For you, that part of it's a pleasure. And if you can make a living at it, you know, you were so involved with the history of Plattsburgh Air Force Base before it closed and when it closed, right?
Yes, I was there, I'm afraid. And our
Nobody
company-
even knows what PIDC was anymore.
Some of us remember with painful clarity what it was. Our company had the contract to market and manage the Air Force Base for 2 years, and then we turned it over to Dan Winnick, who did a fantastic job. And now I'm told the redevelopment of the Air Base is one of the best success stories in the entire nation.
Was there any question in your mind? I mean, we griped and complained when the base closed. I was never in the service, but we all worked closely enough with people who were stationed here, and we cared about the mission, so we were brokenhearted.
You know, in my mind, there wasn't, and I think for the same reason that perhaps Calvin was optimistic. Calvin and I lived through the closure of Harris Graphics in Champlain.
That gave you
And there
a
were
special
people-
advantage, I think,
Well,
for many
and
reasons.
there were a number of people that thought Champlain and this whole northern tier would be a ghost town.
Hold it up, yeah.
But we've recovered from it. We survived. That building is now filled with 50 or 60 smaller companies. Yes, we miss Harris Graphics, but we didn't roll over and die. And Plattsburgh Air Force Base and the city of Plattsburgh had to learn the same lesson the Champlainers had learned years earlier.
And look at it now.
And I think we've done okay. Done another miracle.
Again, we're recording this in 2007, in November, a week before Thanksgiving. I'm salivating already thinking about it. But what's happening out there is amazing. Calvin and I are going to cover the first flights, nonstop flight to Fort Lauderdale, isn't it? Tomorrow, as the crow flies in time. And you know, that's been another thing that I've watched with great enthusiasm. The Plattsburgh International Airport. My goodness!
Well, we can't wait till they open up a souvenir shop because we want to put the books in there too.
Great idea.
So
Good
we'll have
point.
to work on that.
Good point. All right. No idea when you're going to start getting on the second book. I think you better start tomorrow. And if you do live another 30 years, it may have to be a third book.
We might have a hard time finding a second miracle.
I think we better end it there.
You know what? I see miracles every single day. I watched on television, if people can remember this, what is it, the 15th day of November, when I saw a first lieutenant who came and surprised his two little boys in school. And that little boy saw his daddy not knowing that he was going to come home, and he hugged his neck and he cried, and the lieutenant cried, and his wife cried, and Gordy cried, and Gordy's wife cried, and the reporter on television cried.
Iraqi war veteran?
Yeah,
Oh, wow.
those are miracles. We have to recognize those miracles.
That's right.
And this is one, and you are one.
Thank you.
Whether you want to acknowledge it or not. Father Maurice Boucher, we thank you so much for just being who you are.
Thank God for who I am.
See how those magical hands came from milking those 6 cows every other day?
We milked a few.
Oh,
Thank
I
you,
love
Gordy.
it.
We appreciate it very
Mark,
much.
thank you so much for writing this book and for all the other many, many things you do in the North Country. And talk about a miracle. We're talking about how the value of the American dollar, United States dollar, is going down, and we're thankful because our Canadian friends are coming across the border.
I prefer to think of it as the value of the Canadian dollar going up. To me,
Don't
it
you?
sounds better. But the net impact is the same. Welcome back, Canadians.
Bienvenue, Canadien.
Ben oui, hein? Mon français n'est pas très bon, but Father Boucher speaks French very well.
Je parle français
Oh boy,
depuis mon enfance.
I love it. I love it.
Comment tu dis en français? Buy the book.
Acheter le livre.
Achetez le livre. Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for being with us, for everything you've done, both of you, and for taking an hour or so out of your very busy day here
Oh,
at Rouse's Point at 158 to invite us in. Once again, the toll-free number is,
1-800-545-8125.
or
You can
online,
online at crossborder-publishing.com.
A Miracle Comes to Vermont, and the miracle is today in Rouse's Point.
Sitting next to us.
Yeah. Thanks to Calvin for setting the camera up and doing this hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times. There's a miracle right over there who cares so much about the North Country that day after day after day he sacrifices to record the little kids' plays and the
All right,
soccer
my
games
next
and
book
that.
will be The Life Story of Calvin.
Really?
We'll work on that.
Oh, I got a chapter or two for that one. Right near the end.
That definitely needs cleaning up.
I love it. Yes, cleaning up would be the word.
If he sells a copy, that'll be the miracle.
I love it.
Thank you, gentlemen.
And who knows where we're going to be next time for our little corner.